We got Jason Grimm here with IIRC&D. Is that Resource Conservation and Development? Is that the acronym? Jason, do you want to just kick us off with a little background on yourself and just tell us how you got into this line of work? I know you've been doing it for quite a while now, and we just want to learn a little bit more about the program.
Yeah, so at the Iowa Valley RC&D, I am our deputy director. And prior to that, when I started at the organization about 11 years ago, I helped create our food system programming. So we work on several projects that involve different sectors of the food system, from production to distribution to eventually kind of the waste stream of our food system. My professional background is actually in landscape architecture, environmental studies from a design and planning perspective. So I kind of look at the food system from farmers to farmers markets to different components that can be moved around and how they interact with each other, and what are the tools and resources that allow those systems to work together. Today, our organization has about 8 staff members, 5 that are full-time and 3 that are part-time. We work on projects that either focus on a 9 to 6 county region in eastern Iowa, to a few statewide projects with several different kinds of partners. And then we also have started to interact with others nationally on a couple collaborative projects, primarily in the Midwest, but we have worked with some others in other corners of the country as well.
When did you get directly involved with this? How long has that been with the organization?
So I started at our organization in 2009, directly out of college, actually, and since then have kind of saw my work as sort of similar to many entrepreneurs, where you find the work, you find the funding to do the type of work that you want to, in my case, to try to design a food system or create a food system in our region and how we envision it to look like.
We've got Anuj here.
Hey.
Hello.
Hey, Brion.
And so how did you get involved with Iowa Valley? What was your tie-in?
So I was working on my PhD under Professor Carolyn Craigie since like 2015 at Iowa State. And initially, Dr. Craigie and Jason started to work on some of the projects related to food hubs and supply chain. So I was involved as a student in one of the projects for which Jason and Dr. Craigie got a funding from North Central Region Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. And the project involved designing inventory tracking system for a system of food hubs in Iowa. So I was involved as a student at that time, and since then I've been working with Jason on multiple projects. So one of the projects include designing an inventory management system for food hubs, and for food hubs in Washington, Michigan. And recently we collaborated on a project which involves designing a traceability software for farmers to be used for GAP certification. And recently Jason and a faculty at Iowa State and a supply chain specialist at University of Minnesota Extension, we recently got a funding to involve undergraduate students at Dunwoody, also to work on a project on transportation cost estimation for farmers. So we have been working since 4 to 5 years on couple of different projects in which I've applied industrial engineering techniques primarily on food systems.
Great. And Jason, it says that you took some classes at PSU, Portland State. Is that true?
Yeah, I did a small exchange program during my, it would have been my senior year of our 5-year program.
Okay.
Yeah, great university, great time, many memories there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good school. Kind of hidden in the middle of a major downtown area. It's kind of interesting how many students go there. It's really shocking when I found it's 20, 30, almost 30,000 students, I think. So but you wouldn't know it if you were just walking around the downtown area.
Yep.
So you came out and lived here for about a year?
Yeah, for
a whole
it
year?
was about 6 or 7 months. It was a semester
Okay.
long. Went a little bit earlier and stayed a little bit longer.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about some of these projects. I don't know if Anuj you want to start, or Jason if you want to start, but you're talking specifically about food hubs, and I kind of like, Jason, your description of this whole kind of system approach of looking at all the different pieces of it, because as we know that you can get one part right, but if the rest of it's not in sync, it doesn't go very far.
Yeah, I can maybe start. Anuj
Great.
briefly talked about how he first, the two of us met when he was a master's student, I think still at the time. We had gotten funding from North Central SARE. One of the roles that I play statewide is I coordinate the Iowa Food Hub Managers Working Group. It is a group of 7 separate businesses, food hub businesses. They are nonprofits. They're sole proprietor businesses. They're LLCs. One is an actual co-op business structure. They all operate in different regions and areas of the state. I coordinate like professional development and collaborative project development between those hubs. We meet quarterly. Prior to COVID, we would travel around the state and meet at each other's facilities and like do tours, allow each of that food hub to talk about things they struggle with, and allow the other food hubs to hear about how they can potentially provide here's what works for me, you might be able to implement that at your food hub. So we have a lot of trust. We've been doing that collaboration since about 2013, I believe it was. So since then, we've actually had meetings where individual staff at some food hubs have came to tears crying about like how hard it is. They're struggling with their business at the time. So we have a lot of trust with each other and share a lot of personal stuff. And it's a pretty small group. We don't allow just anyone to come to the meetings. You have to be a staff or like a board member of the specific business itself. The first project, though, we saw back in 2014 that several of the food hubs were buying from the same vendors in other parts of the state. One food hub was driving 4 hours from southwest Iowa to northeast Iowa just so that she could get access to Iowa-produced milk that was being bottled, and Iowa yogurt. Because in northeast Iowa or eastern Iowa is where we have a lot more locally produced, bottled, local creameries, local dairies that are producing those products, versus in southwest Iowa, there's fewer opportunities. So we're finding that a lot of the food hubs were crossing paths and actually seeing their individual trucks passing each other, going opposite directions on the road. And we're like, what this is totally wrong, that we're not collaborating with each other. Neither of our trucks are full. So we started a project where we created a tracking software. Dr. Kretschke, who was within the value chain engineering department and working in Anuj, was a student of hers at the time. We thought we were actually having weekly phone calls, and we were talking about, if you met here, would we cross paths at the same time? Would this food hub be willing to hold something overnight in their cooler, and then the next day another food hub comes and picks it up, to reduce transportation for one food hub, and also allow other food hubs to be able to expand product opportunities by tapping into another food hub's network of vendors. And so we realized we needed a software to help actually track this inventory so that, because we often had mistakes where things were left at one place or forgot to get picked up, and which then trickled down and affected all of us in the long run. So we created a simple app with the help of Anuj and Carolyn, Dr. Kretschke, that actually the truck drivers would check in product when they picked it up on their truck, and then when they would get to the end destination, they would actually check it out. So we could actually track that the right number of things were picked up and dropped off, and this app connected to a label platform that the farmers or the vendors would use to label the products, so that it would say the name of the farm, which was it, box 1 or box 10 out of 20, so that the delivery driver could actually make sure that they got everything picked up.
How many food hubs are there in Iowa?
Currently, we have 7 food hubs.
Okay.
And I think in that collaboration, we had 4 operating in that collaboration. Out of that 7, well, for example, one of the food hubs is in more north central Iowa, kind of disconnected from our current routes that other food hubs have. So we don't have consistent crossover and trucking routes. So we've found it more difficult to involve them in some of these trucking transportation collaboration projects. That project led us into a larger set of funding through USDA that today we're still working on, where we're actually designing some tools that the food hubs can use to track their inventory themselves, tools that are allowing food hubs to kind of analyze their sales, analyze their routes. And then today just this past spring, we started a project that now is involving some Minnesota food hubs and Minnesota farmers, where we can actually, a lot of the food hubs don't have a good handle on what is the cost to deliver X number of boxes from point A to point B. If I have to pick it up from this farm and this farm in that route. Also, how does it play into, if this is a frozen product and this is a refrigerated product, this is a box that weighs 100 pounds versus a box that weighs 25 pounds. So we have some funding right now. We are actually just started to do some we just wrapped up some interviews where we're trying to develop a tool that a farmer or food hub can put in information into it, and it'll give them a rough estimate back on what would be the cost to transport this item from point A to point B. And if a food hub would use that, it would allow them to better estimate how much to charge to a customer for a service that they're providing. Many of the food hubs found that they're sort of undercutting themselves and not charging the appropriate amount, and they're actually subsidizing the cost to transport something for someone else from point A to point B. Some of the food hubs use either a % of the gross value of what they're transporting, or they're using just a flat fee. So different food hubs are using different pricing structures, and this tool is meant to help them dial that system in. And we've had students at Iowa State that have been involved in that project, from Anuj at the PhD level to multiple master's students, and then even a couple undergrad students that have helped either do design of those systems, create the actual, the code and the engineering to create those systems. Others have just simply helped create the survey tools and the survey questions, or make phone calls and actually do phone interviews with prospective farmers or food hubs. So students have been involved at different levels, or different, depending on their ability or their level of education, what, things that they could actually work on.
Another project that I just wanted to mention is the inventory tracking system for farms, in which they can trace their farm products from farm to fork, basically. And how that particular project started with a small funding from Johnson County, right, Jason? And then the funding has been secured from Iowa Department of Agriculture and USDA also. So we are working on that project, and I was involved in that project when I was a student. So, and that continued, that is still continuing, and we have a student at Dunwoody also who is being involved in that particular project. So who is an undergrad right now. Just, as what Jason mentioned, the students have been involved in these projects from all levels, bachelor's, master's, and even at PhD level.
How is that working with, is it part of the classwork, or is it part of just opportunities that come up? How are the students tied into this? Is it coursework, or is it project work, or?
So primarily these projects were like mostly research based, like as a part of a funding. But currently, for example, the project that we have got the funding from North Central Region SARE. That project that Jason also mentioned, like designing a cost estimation tool for farmers. In that particular project, we have mentioned in the funding to have 3 capstone projects for students at Dunwoody College of Technology in the industrial engineering program. So that will be a more like formalized like capstone project being designed for the students.
The other part would just be research, maybe that one of the professors is working on at the time, and then is it like grad students that would be involved, or what you're talking about the capstone is basically that the end of their grad or at the end of their undergrad,
Yep.
They're coming in and working on a specific project.
Exactly.
Okay.
The capstone project is a requirement. It's a I think it's a 4-credit course. I think it's a 4-credit course required for degree completion at Dunwoody in their senior year.
I found that I feel like involving students in projects, the most successful way has been where it's either as like a research assistant or like a capstone project similar to what Anuj just talked about. I have worked with students on where it's like a student project or a group project. I found that kind of results back from the students have been more variable in those instances because students are doing it as it's just like a class assignment and it's a graded assignment versus like being in a situation where they're being compensated or they're being as a part-time employee. It's been easier to kind of manage what kind of expectations you get from the students and what kind of finished product you get. I've had really great student group projects and I've had really poor student group projects, and it's much easier to manage I shouldn't call it manage, but to lead and to mentor students when they're have kind of different expectations and responsibilities set up for them versus they're just getting a grade. They're able to kind of control how much effort they want to put into the work.
Yeah, that's good. Good to know. I mean, I think that's kind of the part of this discussion too, is how can we figure out ways to get students involved with great work that's going on in the community, but do it in an effective way that's good for the students, it's good for the organization, and then ultimately for the community. So I think those are great tips and advice for other schools to consider and think about.
And we found that a lot of the funding pieces that we have used, we've been able to work in. We don't always actually, they're not always like employees, but they're usually just typically like a 1090 contract kind of. So we'll write in little stipends from $500 to $1,200, depending on how much time we'll expect the student to work on our project. I believe that the students are, they're really putting something to the community, and so they should be, fairly compensated for their time. We also make sure that like farmers or whoever the actual businesses that are being asked to like comment or provide feedback on some of these things are also being compensated for their time because they're often taking time out of their professional work to do this. So those are the things that we try to work into our funding, because I feel like those things ensure that the project can be successful if everyone is fairly compensated as well.
There's also a listing here with Viva Farms and Michigan State Extension. Is that tied in with what you've talked about already, or is there some other activities going on there? And I like the other discussion with connecting with other states. If you want to share some info on that.
Those two projects are an example of some of the tools that we've started to create that we're working towards to make open source. So having students and professionals like Anuj involved in these projects have allowed us to then release tools that can be open source for other farms or food hubs to use. And so Viva Farms is an actual incubator farm north of Seattle. They have about 20 different farmers that rent land from this larger tract of land of theirs to get their businesses started. And Viva Farms, the main organization, aggregates product that those incubating farmers grow into a CSA, or community supported agriculture, like box of food that then they sell to a customer and deliver once a week. They also aggregate all that supply that all those farmers are growing and then sell that to institutions or restaurants. And they were copy and pasting a lot of data every week to individual Avery label templates to put on boxes to make sure they have traceability from which farm grew it to where it was being sold. And they reached out to us about after hearing some of the tools that we had created. And so we've now they've used it for 2 seasons, so it's probably almost 3 years ago. We created a Google spreadsheet and Excel-based tool that they're currently using to aggregate all the product that their farmers list stuff to. It aggregates an inventory, common inventory amongst all those farms. And then it also creates a labeling system that they're able just to hit a couple buttons and it spits out labels for them that's branded with their business, branded, and then labels the product, the farm that grew it, what the product is, all that kind of important traceability information. For Michigan State, we created some kind of custom invoicing and custom traceability tools and labeling tools that then they've been able to share with some of their farm partners there in Michigan as well. And just like the tool that Anuj talked about, that's tracking inventory and traceability of foods that we're growing, our organization has a program that's called Grow Johnson County, where we actually farm 5 acres of land. That's actually where I'm sitting today, is in the barn at our farm. And all the food that we grow, which is about 25,000 pounds worth of food, we freely distribute to 13 agencies within our county that then goes into food pantries, food banks, meal sites, even neighborhood centers where some of those foods go in home with families, and like at the end of kind of through a daycare or centers. And we wanted to better track where all this food is eventually going, but also which part of the farm is growing it, which field. We annually get an audit for what's called a GAP certification. It's called Good Agricultural Practices. It covers important food safety aspects of our farm business. And we were doing a lot of handwriting of lot codes and on different records and lot sheets. And we found that was actually slowing down our efficiencies, and we were creating a lot of errors by any inconsistencies in how individuals were recording stuff. And so Anuj at the time was a part-time employee of ours while he was still a student. And so we had a small pot of funds that we created a custom tool for ourselves. And then when we did that, we realized that this would be an important resource for other farmers. And now with one of Anuj's students at Dunwoody, later this winter, we're planning to release it as a custom open source tool that other farmers will be able to download through our website. And then we may release other versions of that, in the years afterwards. But it's been great to involve the students and, Anuj through Iowa State and Dunwoody College to be able to impact our work so that we can make these tools available to others as well. And this has been meant to be an open source thing, and we're not planning on making any income from this, but as a resource that we can share and improve efficiencies, improve professionalism on other farms.
I think the ability to remove kind of the I would say non-critical. It's like the work that, you really don't want to be spending time doing. It's not the essential part of getting food to the right places, and growing food. So taking away that other work that gets in the way, I think is pretty powerful.
And I think I just wanted to add one thing is like how like a partnership with the Educational Institute of Nonprofits, like how how this partnership can like leverage and how this partnership will enable basically creating these tools at a very low cost, so that the cost is not being transferred to like nonprofits or even like small farmers. So that's probably the benefit of this kind of model, in which like nonprofits partners with Educational Institute is the cost. And definitely it's a learning curve for students, in which they definitely learn technical skills, as well as like they get to see the impact they're making on the community. So
one thing that I think is worth mentioning is the civic portion of this, and getting students involved with their community. So many people look to engineering as like, how are we going to make the next better product or next process improvement or whatever you want to do? But there's no reason that you can't be doing that in the community. So that I think that's a point that we need to get driven home to people, is that we might as well be contributing rather than working for a big company, Toro, Caterpillar, you name it, any big thing,
Yeah, I think the students seem to be wanting more of those opportunities to feel like they're contributing, and not that they're not getting at those big companies, but they're definitely feeling probably a little bit more reward for that work, or more connection there. Like you said, really feeling part of that community and feeling like they're making a real difference on real problems.
Well, yeah, especially right now in Minneapolis, there's so much opportunity. I mean, well, I would imagine in Portland there's a fair amount too with the rioting that's going on, but our community was so severely damaged that opportunities for the students to get back is very important. And Anuj and I talked about this. One of the things that we, in a typical industrial or a typical engineering program, when you do your capstone, you probably have companies approach the college and say, I've got this project that I want to work on. Will you assign students to it? Finding these type of nonprofit opportunities are different. And that really where you need to go looking is your friend circle or your professional circle. You might look at the board level of the college to see if you can find people who are interfacing in the community that can bring these projects into the college, because your typical nonprofit is not looking for industrial or mechanical engineers to come in and do these jobs. So finding them, it's a more non-traditional thing to try and find these projects. So I guess my point is we're looking to our peer circle to find these opportunities rather than looking to having a company come in and solicit the work.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a great point there, that a lot of the organizations don't know what their need is or what is out there for resources that are looking for that project experience. And so, yeah, kind of saying, here's what we can bring to the table. Is this something helpful? And probably they're saying, yeah, once you kind of explain what your industrial engineering work actually entails, yeah, that's exactly what we need. I had no idea that was a whole major or whole line of study.
Jason, do you want to mention briefly about the Riceville project, and then I can give some more details on that, like how I involved the student. So probably you can give a little bit background on.
The Iowa Valley RC&D and here across Iowa, we do have developed a farmers market managers toolkit for all farmers markets and their professional volunteers or staff that run those markets. And so really since COVID-19 started monthly, we have been facilitating collaborative and educational webinars for farmers markets in Iowa, where we have 40 to 50 markets talking about things that they're implementing to make sure that their market's safe, tools that they're needing. And a couple of the markets have asked us about ways that they could provide some online ordering options for their vendors and their customers to increase social distancing. And so the Riceville Farmers Market was a small farmers market up near the Minnesota-Iowa border in northeast Iowa. A small community that didn't have, well, small population, but then they have a they have a lake nearby and state park that attracts larger than the community's population tourists that come to that area. So they have customers that are both local as well as local tourists too that are coming to the market. And so they approached us about some of the tools that we've created and whether they could be used by their market. And Anuj then, along with one of the students at Dunwoody College, helped create a custom a farmers market ordering platform for their vendors and customers to use.
And just in adding to that, that tool was also created like using a very low cost, like the tool was created at a very low cost. And many of the IE techniques, such as like standard work instructions, creating a workflow, and all those concepts were applied to create that tool. And Riceville Farmers Market has been using that for last 2 months now, approximately. So like some of the like lean techniques such as standard work instructions and like creating a value stream mapping like before and after the COVID, like how the farmers market will operate, as well as like also involved like a lot of tool development using Visual Basic for them to like automate a lot of the operations. So we don't want them to like do a lot of like manage a lot of Excel sheets when they are moving their farmers markets to online like ordering platform. So we developed a lot of like some tools for them to automate all these operations using like macros, for example. So, and the idea was like the idea to create a standard work instruction and idea to create this tool was how other farmers market can also like replicate this particular tool for like in this time of like COVID, for example. And also we have like started to discover like there are some important metrics that farmers market need to actually capture for being more efficient. And we are right now like figuring it out, like how this online platform that we created for the Riceville Farmers Market can help capture all those metrics for farmers market to be more efficient. So it's kind of a like a blessing in disguise. I'm not sure whether it is the right word, but I think how this online farmers market can be in place in conjunction with the traditional farmers market and at the same time making them more efficient. So that was the whole objective of this particular project, and I can share the details like of the online platform that we created for them in the link.
There was a local farmers market here that I went and helped a little bit, and so that was definitely similar situation that they did have a platform they were using, but what they didn't know, the system wasn't giving them metrics on when people had scheduled to show up.
Okay.
And so they were kind of blind to what was going on inside of the system. So in terms of staffing and volunteers and getting them to the right areas to be able to handle the spike in maybe pickup times for people coming through, and this is a vehicle pickup drive-through format, they were kind of blind to that. And so that was part of it, is trying to get out reports and data to say, here's what the plan is, and we're halfway through, or we're 75% of the way through. So we can start to shift resources now over to cleanup and customer service and things like that. But without that, you're kind of like, we'll just stay there until just in case. And that doesn't, maximize the use of the limited resources that they have.
Yeah.
Are the students also doing the programming, like the Visual Basic?
Oh yeah.
Or are you pulling in other groups for that?
Yeah. So the one student at Dunwoody, Dave has also taught that particular student. So he did the the coding in Visual Basic for that tool. So I was like advising him, but he is the one who primarily did that part.
Yeah, I was just one last thing I wanted to note is one aspect that we added to the relationship with the student at Dunwoody, Alan, in this last project with Riceville is actually involving him in some grant writing experience. It was a very small application, but it was some fun to help compensate his time. It wasn't awarded yet, or that we know of, but it was just a good experience, I think, for him as a student to also in this kind of community impact world, is that he got that experience in that project as well. So that's something I would highly recommend in these kinds of student university nonprofit relationships too.
Name's Dave Adolfson. I teach industrial and mechanical engineering at Dunwoody College of Technology in Minneapolis, Minnesota. As you can see, due to COVID, we're all working at home. I'm in my basement, so it's nice to see all of you. A little bit of background on me. I've been teaching at Dunwoody now for 3.5 years. I came out of industry, worked at a variety of different jobs, from aerospace to construction to defense. And Dunwoody is a little bit different. We're traditionally looked at as a technical college. We offer 2-year degrees in things like robotics or CNC machining or radiological technicians, or just a variety of different 2-year programs. And over the last 12 or 15 years, we've run what's called a degree completion program. So we have students who come in with like an automation degree or robotics, CNC, whatever. We look at that as like a freshman, sophomore type experience. And then we offer junior, senior 2-year completion degrees where they come out with a degree in industrial engineering. Over the last, 5 years, Anuj, or so, we've offered a full school of engineering where we're offering complete degrees in industrial, mechanical, software, and electrical engineering. And we're adding a controls engineering program. That's just like any other large university. The difference is that we have, I would say, this feeder program of 2-year degree students that come in. Anyway, one of the courses that I teach is senior capstone in the industrial engineering program. And in that, many of our students, well, all of the industrial engineering students already have 2-year associate's degrees. So many of them have gotten their associate's degree, left, and gone into the workforce for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15 years, however long it is, and sort of hit the ceiling that they can get to with just a 2-year degree, and so they're coming back for a completion degree. Traditionally speaking, prior to COVID, I would say about 90% of our students are employed in industry and working. Many of them working as, for all practical purposes, engineers, but they don't have the second or the correct degree to have the title, so they're back for work.
Do you feel like that works well when they can take 2 years, go to work, and then come back? Is that do you think that's a good way of doing it in terms of getting some real world experience, or does it seem pretty similar whether they go through 4 years in a row?
I think that's a person by person thing. Okay. And some people want to get into the workforce and start making money right away. And, we're maybe digressing a little bit here, but I think colleges are going to be rethinking how they operate on the other side of this pandemic, because there's going to be a lot of unemployment. Unemployment, if you couple unemployment with student debt, you've got real problems. So I think to some degree, getting a little bit of education and getting out into the work world sooner rather than later is probably a good thing for a lot of people. When you're young, 18, 19, you don't necessarily know what you want to be. So not investing 4 years into a program that you maybe don't want to do, or a career that you don't want to do, is, I would say, probably a good thing. I think as you become an adult, we all become have better ability to know where we want to go with our lives. And so I like this method, but it might not be for everybody. Somebody who knows that they want to be a research chemist, or that knows that they want to be an airline pilot or whatever it is, you should go and do it. But a lot of people when they're 18, 19 years old don't have any idea. Anyway, because of the background of these 2-year students that are coming back for their second 2 years, many of them are employed. Typically, 90% of our students are employed and working for companies like, for instance, here in town, we've got Adolfson companies, Caterpillar, 3M, on and on and on, in some sort of technical position. So when they're doing their industrial engineering training, They learn about things like Lean or Six Sigma or 5S, you name it, all the tools that you would traditionally encounter in an engineering program. And they have a job where they might be working in a technician level, and they understand their job and they say, oh, hey, if I made this process improvement, I could make my job better. So many of our students do their capstones right inside of the company that they're working for. On occasion, though, we do have students that are not in a position where they can do a capstone project at their employer. And in those occasions, that's where we can reach out to, and in our cases, Anuj and I have been working on it, nonprofits, and say, hey, I've got this industrial engineer. Do you have any problems? Well, the first thing that I had to do, the project that we did was with a company called Second Harvest Heartland, which is a part of Feeding America, a food bank here in the Twin Cities. The way that the relationship evolved was that a close friend of mine happens to work there. And she and I talk about what an industrial engineer is. And I say, do you have any problems that an engineer could potentially solve? And so there was a lot of time that I had spent with this woman. So she understood what I did and what industrial engineers do. The next step in developing the relationship was I had to put together basically a simple presentation. And I went into Second Harvest and talked to their management and said, this is what industrial engineering is. I teach students these skills, and do you have problems inside of your organization, either logistical problems or systems problems, computing problems, whatever, where I would be able to turn my student loose and they can solve that problem for you. And so some of it was, as engineers, we all speak in jargon. And what I found out is that the nonprofits have their own jargon, and the main thing to think about is you have to be able to communicate, okay, what we call 5S, you're calling something else. Getting past that, I mean, it's like you have to educate the nonprofit, whatever nonprofit that you're at, that this is our language, that's your language, they're the same thing. We can work together, and I can provide you with resources because I have students. So that was sort of the first step. And then the second step was, in our case, we were looking at a distribution and supply chain problem. But probably the bigger picture is nonprofits oftentimes operate on a shoestring budget, and they can't afford to hire an engineer, be it mechanical, electrical, whatever. So for us as instructors to reach out and educate, first of all, educate them, and then second of all, provide them with this resource that's of tremendous value to their organization is a very powerful thing. And I would say the more institutions that can find ways to do this, the more we can contribute to societal problems. And it's wonderful because you get the education going on for the students and you get the societal kickback. So
we got a lot of students and instructors, professors that are part of our Sustainable Development Division. And so I think, this is going to be really valuable to just kind of hear some of the ways in which they can better connect in to work on some of these really, important challenges.
And that's just it. It's like I was saying earlier, rather than looking to industry, you really need to look to your connections and your friend group to find these people and make these connections with what I would call non-traditional projects.
How long do you think it took to develop that when you first reached out to your friend till when you had students actually participating, or translating the language and all that and trying to find a project?
At least a year, I would say.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, because it's the first thing. So this person that I know is a climbing partner of mine. So as we go climbing, we would, most of the time not talk about this type of thing, but that every once in a while the topic comes around to it. So there was a long time coming in developing my relationship with her, where she understood what I do to the degree that we can have that conversation of, hey, this is what my students do. Do you have an application inside your organization? And then to take that next step of getting in front of their management and talking about this is, again, the education process. So it's a long fostering type thing.
Then you've had, how long have you been working with Second Harvest now?
We have been 2 semesters. Okay. And that, sort of one of the other things to think about here is capstones can go well or they can go not well. And the first semester that we worked with them, we had a team of 3 students working inside, and it took them probably 10 weeks for them to understand what they were dealing with. And then the remaining 8 weeks of the semester, they were really quite effective. And that's another interesting point, is that when you take somebody who's an engineer who's accustomed to working on machines or factory floor or what have you, when you bring them into a nonprofit like, you know, a food distribution network, it doesn't feel like their traditional job. You know, and so there's that whole learning process of realizing, okay, how does this place work? What does this company do? That many of us take for granted going into that type of thing.
That was one thing that I mentioned also. The initial few weeks were rough, just because I think there was a lot of, as Dave mentioned, technical jargon from our side and technical jargon from the nonprofit side. So I think it took a lot of time to just understand each other needs. We all are on the one page, kind of situation. It took around 8 to 10 weeks. And once the students know what they need to achieve from the project, I think then it was pretty quick. In the last 8 to 10 weeks, they were able to deliver what was the objective of the project. Yep. And I think one of the things that Dave mentioned is applying the IE techniques in a non-traditional settings. I'm talking about applying lean in a traditional setting such as manufacturing industry. But I think those concepts were already being taught to them in the courses they took, for example, quality and lean systems and those kind of courses they took in their previous semesters. So I think it was a kind of we had to guide the students how 5S can be applied to data, for example. 5S can be applied to a manufacturing setting. It can be also applied to data. So I think those kind of things were definitely challenging. But I think once those were being clearly articulated to the students, I think they got it really well.
The first semester that we worked with Second Harvest, the students really put together. Second Harvest knew where all of their food banks were.
The food pantries.
Their food pantries were, and they also knew where food was coming from, but they didn't have a good picture of, shall I take the food from this portion of the state and move it to this portion of the state? And they didn't really know, do I have sufficient capacity here for the demand or not? And Anuj, I suppose we could do a screen share showing the results of that. Would that be possible?
I think I can share the paper that describes the complete project. But okay. I think in short, what I can say is Second Harvest has different ways to rescue food from donors, through retail stores, manufacturers, distributors, and for example, agriculture surplus from farmers. They were having a fleet of trucks which delivers approximately 40 to 50% of their food to the agency partners whom they directly work with. But the problem they were facing is they wanted to reduce their dependency on their fleet, and they wanted to meet the supply and demand more of locally, so that they can get the food from where it is available and distribute it there and there, so that agency partner can just pick up the food from retail stores and distribute to the for example, the homeless shelters in that particular region. So rather than having Second Harvest send a fleet of trucks to the retailers and then picking up that food and dropping it off at the agency partners, they want to strengthen their food pantries to get their food by themselves from their agency partners and distribute it. So they want to do this supply demand capacity analysis, in which they know for each geographic location. In this particular project, we considered the geographic location or a unit as a census tract. So they studied at each census tract, what is the food availability, what is the food demand, and what is the current capacity to handle that. So based on that, the students created a GIS-based tool using Microsoft Excel, and they learned it from start to end within that particular semester. So that's why initially learning part, they were not being It's not like a traditional industrial engineering problem like that is being taught in the courses, but still the concepts apply, as I mentioned earlier. So they have to learn this new tool. That was definitely kind of a challenging thing for them. But the students in the fall 2019 semester, they learned it. Then they developed the tool and they delivered the project to the second harvest.
Well, and another thing about the way Second Harvest was operating was they had their supply data, they had their demand data, and they knew what their distribution network was. But though that information was held in 3 different places.
Yeah.
So, you know, one group knew where the demand was, one group knew what the supply was, and one group knew where the distribution centers were. But there was no transparency between the 3. And so the students had to take, and all of them organized their spreadsheets and data differently. So the students had to take these 3 data sets, standardize them, for, you know, sort them, throw out what they didn't need, standardize them so they're all the same and they can talk to each other, and then use that GIS-based modeling to show this is supply, this is demand, this is capacity geographically throughout the entire state. So that, you know, that project was quite successful. The second project we were looking at, we took that information and said, okay, we've got areas of need in Mankato, Minnesota area needs to be studied because supply, demand, capacity is way out of balance there. We picked out 3 areas around the state, began that work, and then here's where a capstone doesn't go well because we had COVID in the middle of this thing. Everything came to a screeching halt. So as far as going forward, I don't know. Well, one of the points to take away here is that as you build a relationship with a nonprofit, one of the learning curves was us learning their language and them learning our language. And once you've done that, you know, if you have your senior, we run a capstone in the second semester of senior year, but we can be looking at our first semester senior year and picking students for that and getting them up to speed of what that language is. So like I would say the first semester is the worst. But then once you've learned a little bit about the company, you can start grooming students for that ongoing semester so you keep rolling forward. Having said all that, I don't know where we're going to go in the future because I know in talking to the people at Second Harvest, they're terrified about what's going on right now, and they're afraid that their demand is going to skyrocket, especially after this month is over, if the government doesn't pass any further, some sort of aid package for people. So I don't know. I don't know what next semester is going to look like for us.
And one specific thing, Brian, I just wanted to mention is the results that the first group created for Second Harvest Heartland. Actually, this this summer or this spring semester, the Second Harvest Heartland was writing a grant to improve their infrastructure to in terms of food delivery, and they have used some of these results that the students have come up with, and some of the tools and the analysis and the numbers that the students have come up with to put that in the grant. So I think applicability of the project with respect to nonprofits can also not only direct impact in which you improve the efficiency of nonprofits, but also help them in writing the grants and using the analysis that the students do in the capstone projects to use for grant writing purposes. So that's a very two different impacts that could be created through student projects on nonprofits. One direct impact and one is long-term impact in which you help them in grant writing and all those kind of things.
Well,
I think
getting the grant,
Jason also mentioned.
Getting the grants and in education and what we're teaching our students as engineers, as more engineers get into non-traditional roles, and I'm thinking about the healthcare fields. It could be extremely valuable for a young engineer to learn how to write a grant or learn how to apply for a grant, because I think we'll see more and more of us in these so-called non-traditional roles as companies realize they need to increase efficiency to stay competitive.
As a lot of the program, I know Jason and Dave, have a lot of the projects been tied to a grant, or you think they're more supplement to that? how has that been working with like the capstone projects or student projects? Are they linked in with a grant at all, or are they just kind of like, again, a feeder into the data that they need to show on the grant to get the support behind investing this money into that program?
Well,
Yeah, but
I would say, every capstone project's different, but it certainly could tie directly into, like we have deliverables, and there's 5 deliverables for the capstone project. And it's entirely possible that maybe one of those deliverables is writing a grant. And it depends on where the nonprofit is in their work and what they need. But I guess I would just say, if we're going to educate engineers to work in the nonprofit sector, they'd better know how to write grants, because that's where the money comes from.
Yeah, I would say that our projects where we've had students involved haven't required that grants be part of them. They often are, just because that is our primary funding structure. But we found that it's pretty easy to involve students when it's not grant funded work, because it doesn't cost much to involve students. We primarily just think it's a good practice, so we've kind of worked it into a lot of it's just a practice within our organization.
Jason, would you find it useful if the students hit the ground with that information? I guess is another way of thinking about this. Or
Yeah,
with that skill set.
It's an important skill set. I don't know if grant writing is a skill set versus like being able to communicate through writing and being able to write, like, what is the need, what is the problem statement. I would say that is the skill set, but grant writing is a way to learn that skill set or improve it.
And I think having just access to the data, or being able to provide that data in a way that helps explain the magnitude of the problem, or the impact the problem is having, or the potential benefits of a solution, whether it's been tested or piloted out. And here's what if you scale this up, this would be the potential outcomes. I think that's a really helpful thing that would tie in nicely to grants.
Well, I guess my one last thought is there's a tremendous amount of work to be done here in the Twin Cities, just because of all of the rioting and destruction. And one of the things, there was a listening session with the Dunwoody College president for all of the faculty to sort of talk to each other about where we were at. As faculty, engineering faculty, capstone faculty, challenge your student or your school leadership to find these opportunities for you. And I said something similar to our president in the listening session, but if you look at president, provost, board of trustees, these are all very high-ranking individuals in the community, and they will have the connections that we need to find these types of efforts. So that would be one thing that I guess I would advise faculty to think about. That's where I'll leave it.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. Jason, anything else you want to share?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of the topics and projects and ways students have been involved in all of our work. So,
yeah, great job, Jason. Keep up the good work. And yeah, look forward to some other projects. Maybe we'll do this again in a year or so and see what new projects you've got, dealing with the effects of COVID and how things had to be adjusted and changed. So yeah, this is great. Thanks everybody for participating and sharing.
thank you.
Yeah, let's check in again, because it's for any of our institutions, this is really a distinguishing thing to be doing work of this nature. So I would say let's touch base again on this.
Okay. Dave, Anuj, Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
everybody.
Brian.